All right, welcome back to The Explainer. Today we are diving into something completely wild. Back in November 2018, a group known as Life Shenyuan sent a highly radical, deeply fascinating formal letter directly to the United Nations Economic and Social Council. It was titled, "The Only Solution to Humanity's Crisis." And let me tell you, they aren't proposing standard policy tweaks here. This document actually calls for an unprecedented total overhaul of human society to save the world. We're going to objectively break down exactly what they propose to the UN, step by step.
So let's jump right into the roadmap for today. We're going to rapidly hit 6 points. Number 1, the failure of current climate agreements. 2, the 8 major crises facing humanity. 3, the limitations of our traditional interventions. 4, subverting traditional production and life. 5, the new Oasis for Life social experiment. And finally, 6, a brand new blueprint for the UN.
Starting off with Section 1, the failure of current climate agreements. Why start here? Well, this is the very foundation of their entire worldview.
The author of the letter, a figure named Shui Feng, kicks things off with a massive claim. He states that the globally accepted environmental policies we hear about on the news every single day, they are fundamentally failing us. The document argues that treaties like the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement simply cannot solve our deteriorating environment. And the reason is pretty straightforward in their eyes. These agreements are just treating the surface-level symptoms, while completely ignoring a much deeper, systemic disease.
Which brings us to part 2, the 8 crises facing humanity. This is where we really get into the weeds of how they deeply analyze that systemic disease.
Just take a look at this list. Overpopulation, humanity's greed and lust, environmental degradation, climatic deterioration, massive waste of resources, unstable ecologies, huge refugee problems, and finally, global conflicts. It reads like a doomsday bingo card, right? But the author doesn't just list these seemingly impossible crises, they draw a direct, fatal line connecting all of them. They argue that humanity's baseline greed inherently drives overpopulation and massive overconsumption. This constant, relentless need to hoard resources directly causes the environmental decay, which spirals into climate collapse. When the ecology destabilizes, you get endlessly growing refugee crises, which ultimately trigger global conflicts over whatever resources are left. The core thesis here is that you absolutely cannot fix the climate without deeply analyzing and fixing the human greed that triggers this entire domino effect.
Moving on to Section 3, the limitations of traditional interventions. Because you're probably thinking, aren't governments and global bodies already trying to fix this stuff?
Well, according to this document, absolutely none of our usual tricks are working. The author systematically dismisses every traditional tool we use. They claim that preaching morality, enforcing strict laws, religious rules, sending money, holding endless government and UN meetings, and even military force are all completely useless against this specific chain of crises. In their view, society is literally just applying band-aids to a fatal wound. None of these methods work because they don't actually change how human beings live their daily lives. And that sets the stage for a drastically extreme proposal.
And here is where things take a massive left turn. Section 4. Subverting traditional production and life. Buckle up, because this proposed solution is incredibly unconventional.
Listen to this exact quote translated straight from the letter to the UN. "We should break up traditional marriages and families because they are the sources of human selfishness, the birthplaces of human crises, and the headstreams of all crime and evil." I know that is a shockingly provocative view. But the author explicitly argues that the nuclear family unit itself, that deeply ingrained biological desire to hoard resources exclusively for your specific spouse and children, is the literal birthplace of the greed driving that entire chain of global crises we just talked about. They believe that unless we radically upend our entire mode of living, we are doomed.
So what exactly is the alternative? It's a total paradigm shift. This illustrates exactly why our entire mode of production must change. Right now, our paradigm is built entirely on a predatory, competitive need to secure private property to protect our own separate families. The author states that only by abandoning this exclusive ownership can we stop the relentless cycle of overproduction. By shifting to a communal life mode of sharing and serving enthusiastically, the very need to hoard vanishes. If you don't need to hoard for your private family, you stop overconsuming, effectively cutting off carbon emissions and resource wars at their absolute root.
Okay, Section 5. The new Oasis for Life social experiment. Now, you might think this is purely a philosophical theory, but they actually presented a real-world case study to back it up. The organization defines their experimental blueprint as the new Oasis for Life. This isn't just an idea on paper, it's a working, physical community created by Life Shenyuan. And its absolute core, defining prerequisite is that exclusive marriages and traditional family units have completely disappeared, replaced entirely by this new communal way of existing. Let's look at the actual data they handed the UN. First number, 9. The document states they had been continuously running this social experiment in mainland China for 9 full years prior to submitting this letter.
Next number, 150. The author reports that out of over 200 participants, 150 individuals resided within this alternative community for extended periods of time, fully adopting this radically different way of living and producing.
But here is perhaps their boldest, most startling claim to the international community. Zero. A 0% crime rate. They report a completely flawless safety record within the new Oasis for Life, and they frame it as a direct, undeniable result of completely abolishing traditional marriage and personal property.
And the utopian claims don't stop there. The author lists a whole cascade of other benefits this model supposedly achieves. They claim the elderly are fully supported, kids are reared and educated communally, there's near zero local pollution, a massively reduced carbon footprint, and what they describe as the highest happiness indices of any developed country. They told the UN they have extensive written, photographic, and video evidence ready to prove all of this. Which brings us to the final piece, Section 6, a brand new blueprint for the UN. Armed with a 9-year experiment, what was their ultimate pitch?
Well, they handed the UN an ultimatum and basically asked for land. They pitched a highly specific plan for the UN to formally persuade governments to allow a brand new experimental model on their territory. Interestingly, the 3 contrasting locations they proposed for this prototype were mainland China, the United States of America, or Zimbabwe.
The mechanics of the plan are pretty clear. A UN-backed community of exactly 300 diverse members, people from different religions, cultures, and nationalities. It would operate under the UN's name, but be practically funded and run by Life Genuine. The author deeply believes that humanity's thinking is just too stubborn to change through words or treaties alone. They argue we literally need an intuitive, physical, working model that millions of people can physically see, experience, and eventually copy all over the world.
And they wrap the whole letter up with a pretty intense warning to the UN. It is better to teach people to catch fish than to give them some fish. If the UN turns a blind eye to my proposal, you'll have to deal with many types of devastation everywhere. The author is incredibly confident that without adopting this radical shift in how we produce and live, those 8 crises will inevitably consume us, leaving global organizations to just forever chase disasters.
Which brings us to the ultimate core tension of this entire document. The author argues with absolute, unwavering certainty that tweaking laws, signing climate treaties, and donating money will never, ever save us. They insist that only a total deconstruction of how we live, how we love, and how we own property can actually pull humanity back from the brink. So I'll leave you with this to ponder. Will global survival truly require abandoning our most fundamental social structures? It's a huge, open-ended question, and no matter what side you fall on, this letter absolutely challenges every assumption we hold about the future of human society. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and stay curious.